Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Bikram. Thank you, Louis, for having put together this this fantastic special issue, which I hope everybody will buy, considering the importance of these events. It can really provide us a guideline to think through what is happening. I've been involved with several things with Louis also throughout the special issue. And today I'm going to try to make a different type of intervention, which, I hope will be helpful for all of us to think through what is happening and these historic events that are happening right now in Palestine. And thank you, Lara and Bana, for joining us today. So I want to start today in the aftermath of the Nazi defeat in Europe, thanks mostly to the lives that the Soviet Union army, the Red Army, gave. Because right in the aftermath of the Nazi defeat, on May 8, 1945, the people of Algeria, which at the time was under French settler colonization, marched in various cities, especially the cities of Sétif and Guelma, and they marched asking for the release of political detainees. I hope that from now on you're going to be able to have the parallel of what I'm talking about with the events that we're seeing. They marched asking for the release of political detainees and the application of a more humanely treatment of Algerians on their national territory, which at the time was colonized. Do you know how the marches and protests were met by the French colonizers' authorities? It was a complete massacre. The entire structure of colonial violence was unleashed on the people of Algeria, to such an extent that historians, obviously depending which ones, say that the count of the bodies ranged between 20,000 to 45,000 people in a single day. The colonial regime is a regime instituted and governed by violence, where violence, whether ethnic cleansing or genocide, is foundational to their material and ideological standing. It is always by force that the colonial regime is established, and it is against the will of the people that other peoples more advanced in the techniques of destruction or numerically more powerful have prevailed. As such, a system that is established on violence can only logically be faithful to itself, and its duration in time depends on the continuation of violence. But the violence which is in question here is not an abstract violence I'm talking about. It's not theoretical. It is not only a violence perceived by the spirit. It is also a violence manifested in the daily behavior of the colonizers towards the colonized. It is one that purposefully aims to shorten the lives of the colonized, that is, to kill them. So contempt, a politics of hate, incitement to genocide are manifestation of a very concrete and material violence. Colonialism, however, is not satisfied by this violence against the present. The colonized people are presented ideologically as a people arrested in their revolution. They are arrested in time. They are impervious and impenetrable to reason. They are incapable of directing their own affairs. So they require the permanent presence of an external ruling power. Therefore, the inherent barbaric nature of the colonized requires the constant, if not eternal, use of violence by the colonizers. Violence is in the everyday acts. Violence is against the past and the memory of the colonized. Violence is against the future of the colonized. For the colonial regime, due to its paper tiger nature, presents itself as necessarily eternal, and to do so, it needs endless violence. But it is an enlightened violence, one that posits the forces of light against the ones of darkness. Men, women, children, humans are all turned into flesh. No distinction exists. The colonized must be oppressed and clobbered. Their lives must be annihilated and shortened. The history of the colonized peoples, then, is transformed. It is transformed into what? Into a meaningless, savage, and in moral unrest that must be condemned. Do you condemn what the colonized are doing? It is not even displaced out of history. It is always already outside of history, because the colonized, as I said earlier, lives in a dimension of arrested time. It's outside of time already. So it is very difficult to understand the violence of the colonized as long as it is taught and presented in terms of the ideas disseminated by the colonizers, the imperialist, and thus bourgeois philosophy. For them, violence is a relic of barbarism. Only human animals can do it. And it is bound to disappear under the progress of enlightenment, democracy, civilization. In fact, for all those who have been brought up under bourgeois ideology, and it's many, it is really natural to have a profound contempt for the people who try to explain, I don't even dare saying praising, the violence of the colonized. They are astonished to see that educated, progressive people can be in agreement with the likes of barbaric, even Islamist-like forces. This is why they rush to condemn that violence. They want everybody and everyone to condemn it. How can you dare to make sense, explain, empathize with these animals? At times, they hold up a false distinction, one between civilians and terrorists. But as I said before, such a distinction never existed in the first place. It is always a twist that bourgeois and colonized legality and rhetoric adopts. What happens instead is that the colonizers look at those who explain the violence of the colonized as bad faith people, who recur to some sophistry to give an appearance of reason to the dreams of otherwise stupid, barbaric, terrorist people who are completely incapable of thought. And so, one has the impression that for these people, the colonized, the humanity, only began with the arrival of those brave settlers. However, it doesn't take an incredibly brilliant mind, perhaps again one that is not brought up under imperialist ideology, to realize that when people are caught in a web of three-dimensional violence, which is both temporally in the past, in the present, in the future, and spatially at the level of space, at the level of the body, at the level of the institution, at the level of the spirit, then the colonized, sooner or later, is confronted with an historical necessity, which is how to end the colonial regime by any means necessary. Colonialism drives the colonized people into revolt, because in daily life, the colonizers use their force in a direction opposed to the desires of the colonized. And so the colonized organize themselves under the influence of numerous causes, which is not necessarily socialism. It can be religion as well. And they elaborate the revolutionary idea in order to liberate themselves. In doing so, the colonized people respond to the colonial structure of violence. And this act incarnates an historical necessity. And it is faced at the same time with a massive, daunting task of fighting, not merely to preserve their human existence, to self-preserve themselves, but also to find a way in which its instinct of self-preservation must turn into new values, truth, morality. Their acts literally are destined to change the world, to flip it upside down, because they throw the bourgeois colonial ideologies right into the dustbin of history. The call and actions for freedom incarnate the struggle for decolonization, through which the colonized recognize themselves as humans, endowed with an agential power, the right to self-determination, and the restoration of their right to liberate their country. The actions of the colonized underline a sense of selfhood, of freedom, beyond the physical, the conceptual, the psychological borders of violence imposed on their being. And in the process of launching their counter-violence attack on the colonizers, on the settlers, the colonized have to demonstrate a level of careful planning and discipline that defines the aims of the revolutionary action. Unlike the colonizer, which targets children, women, men, wipes out entire families, and attacks with utmost savagery any infrastructure, hospital, religious place, education, residential units. The colonized people attack army and military units. They even treat prisoners belonging to the community of the settlers with a humanity that surprises the colonizers themselves. The way the colonizer perceived this revolutionary call is ultimately existential. They experience what? Physical and moral fear, and this double fear translates into an aggressive and severely homicidal, genocidal conduct. We find two elements. First, the very powerful guilt complex, because in their heads what they say, if the colonized people should one day rule over us, they would certainly do what we colonizer have done and make us pay for our crimes. Second, they continue to have this very Manichaean vision of humanity, which always divide their world into oppressors and oppressed, civilized and barbarians. So, with the heavy editing, what I actually just recounted is the speech that Frantz Fanon gave in Accra in 1960 called Why We Use Violence. It is important because 9 years after that event, when the Algerian people went on the streets, started the Algerian War for Liberation in 1954. I think we are in an historical moment that is unique. If we go through this speech and we just change the word colonizer and colonized, perhaps with words like Palestinians and Zionist, I think what we are seeing and what we need to understand, that there is one way to go through liberation, and we must understand on which side to be. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.